Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or if you're listening via podcast, thanks for that. Let me read to you a piece that was filed December 12th, 2024 in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Greg Bluestein writing, on Tuesday of that week, Governor Brian Kemp put lawmakers on notice that rewriting Georgia's litigation rules was a top 2025 priority. On that Wednesday, he collected a pile of cash to push that proposal. The Republican took in more than $1.2 million at a fundraiser at Canoe, the swanky Atlanta restaurant that will funnel into his leadership PAC to advocate for the overhaul. Attendees included hospital executives, small business owners, corporate heavyweights, and others who backed the decades-long fight to limit certain types of lawsuits, curb large jury awards, and encourage more out-of-court settlements. That article was from December 2024. Earlier today, the Georgia House voted 91-82 to approve tort reform legislation after months of debate. The idea, as Greg Bluestein wrote in today's Atlanta Journal-Constitution, is to limit lawsuits and bring down hefty jury verdicts with that. Before that vote, last night I had a conversation with an Atlanta plaintiff attorney, good friend of mine actually. Joining me to talk about this from a legal point of view is my good friend Nick Utley of the Utley Law Firm. Nick, how are you, buddy?
Hey, good, Ron. Hey, thanks for having me, and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this.
Yeah, same here. Nick and I go way back. His dad was a teacher and an athletic coach at my high school. Coach Utley was gracious enough to see that my 5'9", 140-pound soaking wet frame wasn't really meant for weightlifting class and would let me slip out to go handle some journalistic stuff at the high school newspaper and whatnot. So, he built the gray matter muscle more than the supple shoulder muscles that I still have to contend with today. But those are some fond memories. Coach Utley was a good fellow back then, and I hope he's doing well. He's doing good?
Yeah, he's doing well. So I talked to him recently. He had a neck surgery late last year, but full recovery from it, and he's back in action.
Good to hear. Well, anyway, that's not what we came together to talk about. We came to talk about tort and help someone out who is not in the legal profession understand what this is all about. We had Senator Nabila Islam Parks on yesterday, who was sort of pointing to what happened in Florida with some similar tort reform measures and how insurance companies were kind of shielding their profits by using subordinate companies to hide those profits to keep the insurance commission there, unaware of the profits being made. Is this much ado about nothing? Is there actually just this run of ridiculous lawsuits that are hampering the insurance industry and hurting businesses? What are the facts? What are you saying from your point of view?
Yeah, well, I'll say this. The backdrop of this push is somewhat interesting, Ron. I mean, Georgia, has been ranked the number one state to do business in for maybe over a decade now. I think at least a decade.
Well, and I know the governor's been bragging about it.
Absolutely, and rightfully so. I mean, that's a great thing. But I think one of the interesting things about it is, how are we the number one state to do business? But then we're also, what's called a judicial hellhole, which is a moniker that the Chamber of Commerce likes to put on places where corporations, bad actors are held responsible for the harm that they cause people. And so, there's a push, and it's, it really kind of rears its head in cycles. And you mentioned Florida. Florida passed a bill last year, so-called tort reform bill, to curb lawsuits. And so Georgia is following suit now. The idea of these frivolous lawsuits is what they're trying to get at. Well, I can tell you as a practicing attorney, who devotes 100% of his practice to personal injury lawsuits, you're not going to get any frivolous cases out of us. I mean, we're kind of the gatekeepers, if you will. I mean, we work on a contingency fee basis, and we'll be working for free if all we do is take frivolous cases, because that's not going to result in any sort of a recovery, for the client or for ourselves. And so we'd all be out of business pretty quickly if we were taking so-called frivolous claims. You also mentioned Florida, Ron, and I haven't read that article, although I have heard about it, and I can tell you that insurance companies like a lot of corporations, I mean, insurance companies are businesses. There can be some creative accounting, but, the way insurance companies make money is kind of in two buckets. One, you have, the premiums collected bucket versus the claims paid bucket. Mm-hmm. But on the second bucket is that you have, the premiums collected, but they don't get paid out. And so what do they do with that money? Do they just sit on it? Well, no, they take it and they invest it in the stock market. And, that's really where the insurance companies make, a large chunk of their money. And so, I think, in 2023, I think maybe the latest year that there was data available for it. And I think it was an $80 to $90 billion profit nationwide. And so, the idea that, Georgia down here, causing trouble for the insurance companies, I'd like to see some more data for that. And I don't know that any data really has been presented, during this legislative debate on Senate Bill 68.
Which is funny because as Senator Islam Parks told us today, she had contacted Georgia's insurance commissioner to investigate insurance companies and their financial dealings or misgivings or dealings. And he basically just kind of shrugged it off and said, if we feel like we need to do an investigation, we'll do it on a case-by-case basis instead of really digging into this, which to me is sort of weird if you've got this push for tort reform at the gubernatorial and now legislative level. Like, we shouldn't know about this ahead of such a sweeping decision?
Yeah, I know there were some studies done. I'm not sure, the findings ever, definitively said, hey, these lawsuits are leading to insurers not being able to profitably do business in the state of Georgia. And I mean, you want an insurance company to be profitable because you want it to be solvent and able to pay claims when they come through. And so, I mean, that is an important thing. But, I haven't seen any data that would suggest that that's what the case is. I mean, I will say Georgia, unfortunately, I think you're twice as likely to be involved in a motor vehicle accident, for example, in Georgia as you are nationwide. And so, that's a big part of it. Also, we want to make it more competitive. So people, so insurance companies can come in, the more competition there is, that'll help keep prices down. But I'm just not aware of a direct correlation between personal injury lawsuits and, rising insurance costs. I mean, there's not a crisis, in my opinion.
So we're with Nick Utley of the Utley Law Firm talking about Governor Kemp's push for tort reform here in the state of Georgia. There was similar reform done, about 20 years ago when Governor Sonny Perdue was in office. So what has changed since 2004 that has made this such a drastic need?
You got me there, Ron. Again, I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't think anything really has changed to make it a crisis or a drastic need to be done, other than, as you mentioned in the lead-in, that, promises were made to fill campaign coffers, and, he's trying to fulfill that promise.
What kind of effects would this have on plaintiffs that you might be representing in a situation that could be devastating to them?
Well, there's no caps per se in this bill, and that's something that was, kind of done in the last go-round of tort reform in 2005. Was that the legislature put a cap on non-economic damages in medical malpractice cases. That cap ultimately was struck down by the Georgia Supreme Court, and so it's no longer in place. This bill doesn't offer a cap in any way on the amount of damages an injury victim can be awarded, but it does have a number of issues that would, create problems for folks. Kind of the most glaring immediate problem is that 5 or 6 of the 8 provisions in the bill will be applied retroactively. And so, there are some procedural elements of the bill that govern, voluntary dismissals, bifurcation of trials, stays of discovery pending motions to dismiss. And so it's going to be a lot of confusion for active litigants, people who have cases that the rules are now being changed, in the middle of the litigation process. That's going to create just a lot of confusion. So that'll be an immediate impact folks have. Some of the biggest changes in this bill are revolving around what's called a negligent security claim, okay? And this is not an area that I specialize in, but to give you a Cliff Notes version of it, the idea being, say you've got a business owner, an apartment complex, for example, that, maybe in a high crime area, or they have reasonable foreseeability that a crime is going to occur on their property, whether it's happened before, on their property, or, there's some other circumstances that would give the business owner reasonable foreseeability that this type of crime is going to happen. Under the current state of the law, if the business owner just does nothing to try to prevent these types of crimes from happening on their property, they can be held liable for civil damages in a civil tort lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
SB 68 really curtails the ability of that injured person to seek civil justice. Okay. There was a small amendment to that in the House subcommittee yesterday that passed out of the subcommittee. And as you mentioned, this might go to the floor of the House tomorrow to be voted on by the full House, that carved out cases involving victims of sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because a lot of times you have these hotels, for example, that, they know what's going on and that folks are being sex trafficked in their buildings. They're just doing nothing about it, whether it's because, hey, they need the revenue from the, from the folks, that are involved in this or whatever. There was a carve out for that passed out of the House Rules Committee. But that's the only type of case that got the carve out. And so there's, some question whether that's going to pass constitutional muster. I don't pretend to be a constitutional scholar, but, that's one of the big parts of the bill. And I think that's part of, one of the big parts of the bill that the proponents of this bill are really pushing for is curtailment of these negligent security cases.
So we're on with my friend Nick Utley of the Utley Law Firm, offices up in the Cumberland area, trying to wrap my simple-minded self, my brain around the need for tort reform. 21 years after Republican-led efforts to do the very same thing in 2004. We'll pick up on this conversation when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. 404-919-2725 is how you can call into the Ron Show. This offering from Georgia Senate Democrats and Georgia Senator Josh McLaurin.
Hello, my name is Josh McLaurin. I'm a Georgia state senator, and this is a show called Between One Fern. And today I'm going to tell you about Governor Brian Kemp's plans to give money back to people using something called tort reform. What is a tort? Does Brian Kemp even know? But supposedly tort reform is supposed to lower your premium costs over time on insurance policies that you own. Well, this is actually a giveaway to insurance companies because they already make billions of dollars in profits with a B because they have investment income. They're basically like banks. And what they want to do is prevent the little guy, plaintiffs in lawsuits, from getting paid when they get seriously injured. Some of these cases are really horrible. People lose limbs, they die. And their family maybe gets $2 million in some cases to make up for their loss. Never replaces the person, but it's the best the system can do to punish bad corporate misconduct. Well, the insurance companies want Brian Kemp and the majority to give them a pass on these lawsuits so that they can pad their profits and make even more billions with a B. Well, I'm opposed to that, and a lot of my colleagues are as well. What we really need is insurance reform to force these insurance companies to give back some of those billions of dollars in profits so that you do get actual rate reductions and premium decreases.
Yes.
That would actually help costs come down. Anyway, I just wanted you to know what tort reform is and what Brian Kemp is trying to do. This has been Between One Fern.
Unfortunately, the Georgia House voted 91-82 to pass along that measure soon to be signed into law by Governor Brian Kemp. Let's pick up on this conversation on tort reform with my friend Nick Utley of the Utley Law Firm, serving Metro Atlanta, offices in the Cumberland area. So what does SB 68 aim to actually do or improve in this process? I'm failing to come up with anything.
Well, as far as what it aims to do, I think Governor Kemp has stated that it'll, level the playing field in the courtrooms and stabilize insurance costs. Okay. It's interesting. I don't know that any testimony has been provided from insurance companies as to how exactly these reforms are going to lower insurance costs. And I think it's telling that there is no commitment from the insurance companies to freeze rates or lower rates or anything like that. This is supposed to lower insurance costs, but nothing in this bill even mentions insurance costs. So it's hard to find the correlation there.
There's talk about this bill somehow speeding up the process.
Well, I don't think it'll speed up the process at all, Ron, and unless it just flat out eliminates some claims, and then you really sped that up. One provision of the bill provides for stays of discovery. If the defendant files a motion for a more definite statement or a motion to dismiss, even if they don't have merit, they can file that, right after the lawsuit is initiated. And then that just stays discovery. Now, there's already a limited stay of discovery that happens with filing of a motion to dismiss, but there needs to be some merit to that, and this would just hold up the litigation process for quite some time, while we're waiting on a ruling on these motions. You just can't get discovery done. The last section of the bill talks about bifurcation of a trial. So bifurcation is when you have a case that, you want to have two phases to it. You want to have a liability phase where you determine, like, hey, is this the defendant's fault or not?
Okay.
And then you have a damages phase where you get to talk about what are the harms here, what's the monetary value we're going to put on those harms. Okay. Interestingly, judges already have the power to bifurcate or trifurcate a trial. Okay. This is not some new idea. This is something that already exists. A defendant has to make a motion for it, and then if a judge finds that there's good reason to bifurcate a trial, they can order that. Mm-hmm. This bill would make it really mandatory at any party's election. They just say, hey, I want this trial bifurcated, and it would really take the discretion away from the judge to do that. There again, yesterday in the Rules Committee, there was a carve out for that. So for cases involving sexual offenses, where the victim can establish that having to testify more than once would cause, serious psychological or emotional distress, there's not going to be bifurcation there. Or where the amount in controversy is less than $150,000, there won't be bifurcation there. But in every other case, if the defendant elects, hey, let's bifurcate this trial, the court would have to do it, okay? That takes a case, and it just makes it slower. The trial of the case will be slower because you have to basically try, is this the defendant's fault or not? And then you have to, have the jury go out, decide that. If the jury decides, yes, this is the defendant's fault, well, then you have the second phase of the trial where you go through your damages. What are the plaintiff's injuries? What are their medical bills? What are their pain and suffering damages, for what they've gone through? And you have the jury go back out and decide that. So that's not going to speed up anything at all.
So, and I was going to ask you, are those both jury situations, and would you be dealing with the same jury in both cases? You would be dealing with the same jury in both cases. Okay. There was a motion to amend the bill yesterday. It did not carry to, basically say, hey, when you're bifurcating a trial, if the jury checks yes and finds that they are liable, then you proceed immediately to the damages section, or, as the bill was constructed originally. The judge could say, all right, well, come back next term of court, and then you're coming back months later, potentially. It would be the same jury, but, it's just a matter of timing. So at the end of the day, who do you think benefits from passage of this bill? Well, I think insurance companies will certainly benefit from it. If a complete class of cases, such as negligent security cases, are all but wiped out by this bill, then, they can take off that underwriting risk. Businesses such as, apartment complexes, they can benefit from it based on those cases being wiped out. Your average Georgian, your middle-class family that's working, I don't see how they're going to benefit from this at all. Which leads me to another point of this bill is this bill is going to, seek to kind of abrogate the collateral source rule, which has been the rule for 150 years in Georgia. Basically, it says that defendant does not get a discount for the fact that the plaintiff had, health insurance or any other way to pay for these medical bills. The defendant is held liable for the full amount of the bill. Okay. The bill, as it is currently constructed, will let evidence go to the jury of the full amount of the bill, and then the amount that's actually needed to satisfy the medical bill. Okay. And that, that on its face kind of sounds fair. Why should they have to pay, any more than what's necessary to satisfy the bill? Well, the problem is that you take the benefit of the health insurance that this person has purchased or, has through their employer
or if they were part of the military, the benefit of their TRICARE or their VA benefit. You take that away from the person who earned it, and you give it to the person that caused them their injury. And I mean, that's just not fair, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, 1,000%.
So, folks that are out there, doing what we, want them to do, buy health insurance or, work at a job that has it, they're going to be penalized by this bill. The person that doesn't have health insurance, or the person who causes the harm, they get the benefit of it. And, it ain't right in my book.
Yeah, no, I feel you there. All right. Well, thank you so much for explaining this in much better detail than anybody else that I know could have, for sure. Nick Utley with the Utley Law Firm. We'll all be watching what happens on the House floor when this does come to a vote, probably Thursday or perhaps Friday.
Yeah, very likely to be Thursday, March 20th. So if you have opposition to this bill, we would encourage you to call your House representative. You can look them up. Just Google Georgia, find my legislator, and give the office a call and tell them you oppose this bill.
Good advice. Nick Utley with the Utley Law Firm. Thanks for joining the Ron Show, buddy.
Hey, thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.
I guess for timeline's sake, I should point out that he and I had this conversation Wednesday afternoon as he was heading home. So when you hear him talk about yesterday, he was talking about Tuesday. When you hear him talking about tomorrow, he's talking about Thursday, today. If bifurcate and abrogate didn't confuse you, then that shouldn't have either. The Ron Show is back after this on America One Radio.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So I guess today we expect to get an executive order, not by auto pen though. Nope, we'll get the smudgy Sharpie marker signature on this bad boy to start to dismantle the Department of Education. And I can't help but think of my former sister-in-law, who is a school teacher over in rural Polk County, Georgia, a county that assuredly relies on state and federal funding because that county can't possibly, just knowing the demographics and the economic makeup of the county, I know that Polk County is one of several Georgia counties that really leans in on state and federal funding for its education. Title I for disadvantaged students, special education under the Individuals with Disability Education Improvement Act. That's the IDEA program that the current Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, from the World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, didn't know about. Child nutrition programs like the National School Lunch Program. But that's not me picking on Polk County. Anyway, I think about my ex-sister-in-law because she is one of those not bright people. She's a smart person. In fact, I think she's got like a master's degree in education. She is not a dumb person. And yet sometimes you just wonder because she is a soft Republican voter. And when I say soft Republican voter, she's not going to run around wearing MAGA gear, Trump stuff. She's a reasonable person. She's someone you can talk to. And yet she is in Polk County, Georgia, and she is surrounded by family, friends, neighbors that, for the most part, all think in group speak. Now, I also think about her other sister, my other ex-sister-in-law, who is also named Misty. I have a sister named Misty, and my ex-sister-in-law's name is Misty. Anyway, I think about ex-sister-in-law Misty, and she and I are like best friends. And she doesn't give a She rolled around with Joe Biden decals on the back of her truck. She's something else. But I think about Polk County, Georgia, because it's not unlike the county I grew up in when I was a kid anyway. Columbia County is a bedroom county community outside Augusta, Georgia, but it didn't used to be as suburban as it is now. I lived on the more rural side of Columbia County, which felt a lot like what Polk County feels like now. And with the evisceration, potentially, of the Department of Education, counties like Polk and a lot of the 159 counties in the state of Georgia that aren't Metro Atlanta, that aren't Metro Augusta, that aren't Macon, Bibb, Columbus, Muskogee, Savannah, Chatham, Athens, Clark, a lot of these ex-urban and rural counties are going to find themselves in a precarious situation. And a lot of those counties, most of them, I would argue, voted for Trump. Georgia relies a lot on federal funding for a significant portion of its education budget. We're talking about federal funding making up about 16% of public school funding in Georgia just a few years ago. So what's going to happen when the Department of Education goes away? The thought is, well, the funding will just go right back to the states. So, I mean, do tax cuts make your kids smarter? I ask that because Georgia sits on a $16 billion surplus, and the Republican Party's answer to that is, well, tax cuts. We'll just give the money back. And listen, I'm not opposed to getting money back, and I'm not opposed to having my taxes cut. Not me personally. I'm more opposed to someone super very much well off getting a disproportionate cut that impacts my health and well-being, the education of our students, whom, we're all going to rely on at some point in time to take care of us in our senior moments and our senior years. The Department of Education getting whacked also means that state decisions get to be made on curriculum far more than they have been the last 40 years without scrutiny from the federal agency. We just saw the Trump administration roll back, by the way, desegregation efforts on corporations. You don't think states like Oklahoma are just chomping at the bit to do things like rewrite their curriculum? I mean, they're already trying to do that. They're trying to seep into history questions about the 2020 election. I'm not making that up. There was a time when the organization, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, were impacting curricula on history textbooks in states like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, promoting the lost cause theories, speaking less about slavery and more about states' rights. That's coming back with the evisceration of the Department of Education. But it's not just the Department of Education that's under attack here. We're seeing a complete dismantling of the federal government in all manner of agency. USAID was just the first. Jay Bookman put out a piece, by the way, dropped it at 1 a.m. I hope he's asleep. We'll try and get him on the next day or two to discuss this. I'll share it in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. I'll go through some of the highlights of it here. Jay writes, our lives rely on systems. Flush the toilet, the sewage system takes it away. Flip an electrical switch, the light turns on. Hit the brake pedal, the system brings the car safely to a halt. We take those systems for granted, he writes, assuming that they'll operate unseen and in the background because that's how we design them and why we build them. We build them so we know they'll be there when we need them. But these days, critically important systems are being stressed in ways that they weren't designed to withstand. In some cases, systems are being dismantled by people who don't understand what purpose they were created to serve in the first place. Boy, does that not make you think of all of your MAGA friends, like who have no idea how these federal agencies operate or what they operate for. I kept thinking about all the USAID stuff, people questioning, well, what was this for? What's that for? Listen, don't ask me to go under the hood and start pulling wires if I don't know what the hell they're for, because I don't. They may look useless or I don't understand what they're for and why does that do that? You don't want me pulling wires from under the hood of your car because I don't know what the hell they do. That's kind of what's happening right. Sometimes you have to tell yourself, I don't need to know that. As a U.S. citizen, there are things we just don't need to. The JFK files, the big dump of 80,000 pages of JFK files yesterday. I'm not sitting here suggesting that it's okay for the government to cover up things. I'm saying sometimes there are things Joe Citizen just doesn't need to know. We don't need to know, for example, why the CIA has expenditures that they can't completely explain to us. There are some things we just don't need to know. Back to Jay Bookman. Imagine amateur house flippers swinging sledgehammers and knocking down interior walls without regard to whether those walls might be load-bearing, then marveling when the roof starts to cave in. Is that not Elon Musk letting all of the FAA people go and then realizing, oh, crap, we need planes to stay in the sky. Can we hire them back? All across the federal government, Jay Bookman writes, that's what we're now witnessing. Local Social Security and Small Business Administration offices are being shuttered under the rationale that they are infested with fraud, waste, and corruption. By the way, all that fraud and corruption, and yet how many arrests have been made about this? Bookman continues. And thousands of IRS employees are being fired. The National Weather Service is being slashed, as is funding for cancer research and other forms of science. Remember the 13-year-old boy at the joint speech given to Congress by President Trump? Yes, shame on Democrats for not standing up to applaud that little boy. Absolutely. Those that didn't, what were you thinking? The optics are terrible. However, slashing of cancer research funding, how is that not also terrible? How is that not worse? The CDC, Jay Bookman writes, and our public health system, our legal system, our emergency management system, our political system and economic system, as well as our 80-year-old system of diplomatic and military alliances, are all being stripped of resources, manpower, and credibility without much concern for what the consequences might be. Y'all, this is what makes it hard for me to sleep at night. Or, better yet, when I wake up to go to the bathroom at like 5:45 in the morning, my mind just turns on automatically and all this stuff starts rushing through my head. I theorize this is why I've been focusing so much on some Atlanta political issues because the national stuff, it's like doom scrolling. You start doom scrolling through Blue Sky or Twitter X or Facebook and all of the stuff that's going wrong in the world right now with this leadership, and it's too much. And I'm trying to remember who it was. I want to say it was Pete Buttigieg who said that what we need to do in the interim is look at the local and look at the state level. And so that's kind of what I've been doing. But it's hard to ignore the dismantling of decades, yes, of federal bureaucracy, yes, of some waste. But the fraud, the corruption, if that were true, we'd be seeing arrests, and we're not seeing arrests. Okay, back to Jay Bookman. One of President Trump's biggest targets is the Environmental Protection Agency. At a cabinet meeting last week, Trump announced that 65% of EPA personnel would likely be fired because they just aren't needed, although that number was later walked back for the time being, he says. Bookman writes, in announcing a major rollback of air, water, and climate enforcement programs, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin last week proclaimed it, quote, the most momentous day in the history of the EPA. Bookman opines momentous is probably accurate, but not for the reasons that Zeldin imagines. Let's take a step back and ponder what we might be doing to ourselves, Bookman writes. And this is what keeps me up at night or early in the morning. Most people don't remember that as recently as 25 to 30 years ago, the Atlanta metro region had a serious air pollution and water pollution problem. On hot summer days, ground-level ozone levels were so bad that going outdoors would make your eyes sting and your throat and lungs hurt. Schools were told to cancel outdoor recess, and parents were warned not to let their kids go outside and play. Outdoor workers were warned about possible lung damage. The ozone alerts went on for weeks at a time. And when a big summer thunderstorm came through and cleared the air, Bookman writes, it caused problems of a different sort. Heavy rainfall would swamp the city's ancient sewer system, and the water system's still ancient, sending hundreds of thousands of gallons of raw, untreated sewage into the Chattahoochee River, where our downstream neighbors were understandably displeased. Under the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts, the EPA demanded that those problems be corrected, that systems be created to fix them. State and local officials, Bookman writes, egged on by the region's business community, complained bitterly at the time that what EPA was demanding was impossible. It would be too expensive, they said, and it wouldn't work anyway because smog was natural in this region. Atlanta's growth, they warned, would have to be stopped dead in its tracks if the federal government got its way. Since then, though, Metro Atlanta has doubled in population. Coal-burning power plants were cleaned up or closed down. Gasoline was reformulated and vehicle inspections programs implemented. Major highway programs such as the Outer Perimeter were canceled, and development alternatives to sprawl were embraced. As a result, bad ozone days, which often numbered over 100 a year in the 90s, are now down to 1 or 2 days annually. And Atlanta's sewage systems are much improved. What some had deemed impossible was instead achieved. But here's the thing, Jay Bookman writes, for the most part, we don't have a cultural or institutional memory of those days, even though they were barely a generation ago. The air is clearer, and breathable. Our sewage systems work, and we just take it all for granted, Bookman writes, as if this is the natural state of things, as if this is how it has always been and always will be. And it's just not true. If we don't take care of our systems, they don't take care of us. And of course, it's not just environmental protection. Through vaccines, better sanitation, and the hard work and dedication of the CDC and other agencies, we've been so successful at eliminating deadly diseases that we no longer remember how many lives they used to take. We've forgotten why we needed vaccines in the first place. In the world of foreign policy, we haven't faced a major war for 80 years, so why do we need the NATO alliance? On healthcare, through Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act, more Americans have access to healthcare than ever before. But none of this is permanent, Jay Bookman writes. We can't starve those systems and still expect they'll be there when we need them. It's as if we're playing a giant game of Jenga with our country, pulling out a piece here, then a piece there, wondering which piece will be the one that makes the structure fall. Good stuff. Going to put that in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. And we'll have Jay Bookman on soon again. I haven't had him on in a while. I don't think he's filed a piece in a while either, so it'd be good to catch up with him. All right, going to take a quick break. One more segment. Thank you for listening. It's The Ron Show on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or wherever you podcast. All right, final segment of The Ron Show. Let's do a couple of little stories that caught my eye. This dropped yesterday afternoon. Sorry. Greg Bluestein at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporting that the effort to revive Georgia's controversial religious liberty legislation stalled in a House committee Wednesday after 2 Republicans joined Democrats to oppose it. Hope springs eternal, right? The measure could come up for another vote, but the Republican pushback to a bill Democrats have long rejected was another reminder of how divisive the legislation remains after a decade-long debate. Listen, though, you got to stay vigilant. They've been trying the school voucher thing for how long? And they finally got it pushed through, and it's watered down, it's muddy, but it's there. It's useless to most families who could benefit from it, because it doesn't cover all tuition, but it's there so that those families that could benefit from it but also could afford it get to take advantage of it. Anyway, Bluestein continues, the unexpected vote came after 4 hours of emotional testimony over the measure, which was once the most polarizing issue under the Gold Dome, but has more recently been eclipsed by other culture war feuds. Trans rights, man, that just totally took over, right? Republican State Representative Deborah Silcox, who represents a swing Sandy Springs district here in Metro Atlanta, voted against the bill after her effort to add an anti-discrimination clause was rejected by the GOP-led committee. She was joined by State Representative Stan Gunter of Blairsville. Wow. The 7-5 vote against the measure set off a frenzy in the committee, which quickly moved to adjourn. The swift decision means that supporters can bring the bill, which cleared the Senate along party lines, up for another vote as soon as today. Religious conservatives in Georgia have long pushed to pass the legislation modeled after the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 to provide an extra layer of legal protection for people of faith from government interference. But critics have framed the legislation as a thinly veiled effort to sanction discrimination against, you guessed it, LGBTQ Georgians, and warned that its passage could bring steep economic backlash. Bluestein continues, Governor Nathan Deal cited that argument in 2016 when he vetoed the legislation, a move that infuriated his party's base. At a panel discussion this month, he said he nixed it because it was an attempt to target same-sex marriage disguised in a, quote, good-sounding religious aura. That's why Silcox and other lawmakers have pushed for anti-discrimination protections in the measure, something that Republican State Senator Ed Seltzer, the bill's sponsor, and other advocates say would weaken it. We've shown this does not discriminate, said Setzler, who added he worked with Governor Brian Kemp's aides to piece together the measure. Wink, wink. Critics of the legislation say the refusal to include specific protections against discrimination is telling. Esther Panich, Democrat, also of Sandy Springs. What does that tell me, she said. That tells me this is going to be used as a sword and not the shield the federal government intended it to be. This threatens the community it claims to protect. Ooh, how about this? I saw this from WAGA Fox 5 Atlanta. Dan Raby reporting here. This, not gonna lie, excites me a little bit. Dropped that at 7:15 this morning. He writes that the Georgia Department of Transportation is looking at creating a passenger rail service between 2 of the state's biggest cities and wants your input on the project. I'm begging you, give input. State transportation officials say they are now in the public engagement phase of the Atlanta-Savannah intercity passenger rail project. And by the way, this project has been sort of tinkered with for years now. This is the thing, man. These things, oh my gosh, they get started. This one got started, I want to say, in how long? 2022. Yeah, April of 2022. That's how long ago this goes back. So now we're at the public input phase. I don't know why we're just now at the public input phase, but here we are. There will be transportation planning, environmental planning, all in the next year or so, financial planning. Then there's, the governance part, identifying potential strategies of operating and maintaining the service, and then the phased implementation plan with specific projects, cost estimates, phased approaches, environmental impact in 2028. So don't get too excited. It's not like we're going to be on this by the end of the decade. Although my God, we're the United States of America. We should be able to do this. Anyway, currently train trips between the two cities require transfers in different states. That is true, and can take more than 24 hours. That also is true. The new project aims at reducing the trip's time and cost dramatically. In 2022, Dan Raby writes, the federal government gave Georgia $8 million to look into the feasibility of the project. The state added its own $2 million from the rail budget. GDOT is working to create a service development plan which would examine the need for the service and include factors like station locations, service descriptions, a financial plan, and environmental benefits. Officials are hoping to have the plan completed in early 2028. The broader mission is to connect the Atlanta-Savannah project with other rail projects in the works in other states. These include the Atlanta-Charlotte project from the north, in the North Carolina Department of Transportation, the Atlanta-Chattanooga-Nashville-Memphis project from the city of Chattanooga. Officials are also looking into possible future connections to Florida. While Amtrak is being considered as an operator for the service, the GDOT says they are looking at other private operators and public models. Have I been talking about this for a while or what, y'all? I said last week, 2 weeks ago? I pointed to Air Canada working with Canadian officials, provincial officials there for a public-private partnership because Air Canada wants to get out of the puddle jumper game. Delta Airlines, are you listening? Do you really want to be flying those loss leader? In fact, you have other carriers do this for you under your flag. Can't we get out of this heavily subsidized loss leader puddle jumper game? Why are we flying people from Augusta to connect to flights in Atlanta when we can have rail, high-speed rail? Why are we doing this from Savannah to Atlanta? Why are folks, a lot of folks, if we're being honest, they'll just drive to Chattanooga, to Jacksonville. It's not a hub airport, but it's a bigger hub airport or smaller hub airport than what Savannah has. Why would people fly from Columbus or Macon just to connect in Atlanta? It's insipid. It's dumb. Chattanooga, same thing. Why would you do that? Delta Airlines could get out of that business and instead be flying folks out of Atlanta after connecting on their rail flight. Anyway, so if you're wondering, what you can do to provide public input, I'm just going to put this in the show notes. You know it at ronshowatl.com. You can learn more about the project and have your say at the GOT website and take their survey as well. Very excited about this. And, listen, how do I say? I'm measuredly excited about this because, again, we're talking end of study by 2028 and 5 to 10 years or longer to build something out. We're looking at a 13-year program. This is what got me so angry yesterday when I was talking about Mayor Andre Dickens playing around with Beltline Rail. You got something that the voters are excited about. They voted for the tax measure. You got the money. Not enough of it, but you got a lot of the money. You need more, but you got a lot of the money. And now you're saying, well, we're going to change the priorities and the phases. And all you've done is set that project back, 10 years, maybe longer, well after your mayorship has ended in the city of Atlanta. This is the thing that I think really makes people disgruntled about governance and progressive and democratic ideas, liberal ideas. You can't keep pushing the can down the road and telling people, just you wait. That doesn't excite people. That doesn't get people on the streets, grassroots, signing people up to vote, et cetera, and so on. So that's why I'm cautiously optimistic about the Atlanta-Savannah intercity rail plan. But think about it. Like that rail would literally connect Savannah and Statesboro and Macon all the way up to Atlanta. That's exactly what I'm talking about that this state needs, and why I've been saying anybody who wants to run for governor in 2026 from the Democratic Party needs to champion this program and enhance it, put some real weight behind it, and say, yes, this needs to happen. This is how you connect Georgia and Atlanta so that all of Georgia is connected. All right, that's going to do it for today's Ron Show. I want to thank my friend Nick Utley again from the Utley Law Firm for joining me and talking to me about tort reform and using words like bifurcate and abrogate. I didn't know what they meant before, but I looked it up while we were talking, so I felt a little smarter. Show notes, as always, at ronshowatl.com. Back tomorrow, 9 a.m., 5 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive, Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Take care.